It's Johnny Two-Face here, back with another reaction video. This time I'm reacting to Frederick the Great, the Battle of Freiberg, 1762 by House of History. If you haven't seen my reactions to the other episodes in this series, I suggest you check them out before checking this one out. And the usual disclaimer when I react to anything historical, if I don't show so much what is considered a proper reaction, is probably obvious. I don't know much about the subject at hand, and if I do anything, I'll most likely pause the video to give my input or ask any curious questions, which hopefully will be answered in the comments below. With that being said, the link to the original video will be in the description down below. Please go and subscribe to House of History, another great history channel which I believe deserves more recognition. And now, before we start the video, I just think what I remember from the last episode is the Austrians and the French were on the verge of bankruptcy. Russia had some political turmoil after Peter III's death, because Peter III took over from Tsarina Elizabeth, and now, after his assassination, it's now under Catherine the Great, I think she's known as. There's now peace between Sweden and Prussia, and it looks like so far things are looking up for the Prussians. So without rambling on too much longer, let's get this up on screen and see what happens in this episode. I'm just checking my OBS every now and again.
The King of England wants to win. The King of Prussia does not want to lose, because if he doesn't lose, he will have won everything. The echoes of the Battle of Burkersdorf reverberated across the Austrians' broken spirits.
Wow.
Their once great coalition was now splintering, leaving them to face their enemies alone. As Great Britain and France began negotiations for peace, a prelude to the end of hostilities, Russia's new...
I've said this in the last one, but I'm not saying it's right, but it just looks like the Habsburgs just want to wipe Prussia from the map, by the looks of it. And I wonder in future episodes they're going to talk about this isolated Prussian duchy up here that's like surrounded by the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth. I wonder if they'll talk about that in future episodes.
New Tsarina, Catherine, was unwilling to launch another attack against Frederick.
Wow.
The coffers of her nation lay empty, bereft of funds.
So Russia also bankrupt as well.
Funds to finance another war. The once mighty Austria was on the brink of standing alone. Though the Prussian situation in Silesia seemed somewhat hopeful, the front in Saxony was still dangerously unpredictable. With this in mind, King Frederick called upon his enterprising brother, Prince Henry, to defend the region with an army of 30,000 troops. At the onset of the 1762 campaign, an Austrian corps, led by the renowned General Maguire, occupied an entrenched camp near Freiberg. But on May 12th, Prince Henry and his troops launched a surprise attack on the chain of posts screening the Austrians' positions, emerging victorious. The Austrians were forced to abandon their entrenched camp, and on May 14th, the Prussians claimed their place in the very same Austrian camp near Freiberg. Then, Serbelloni was replaced as commander-in-chief of the Austrian forces in Saxony. General Hadik took up the mantle on September 7th. He soon hatched a daring plan to drive the Prussian troops out of the region, threatening their precious bakery in Freiberg. On September 27th, the Austrian and Imperial Corps launched a series of complex maneuvers aimed at dislodging Prince Henry from his entrenched positions at Freiberg. Despite all his efforts, Prince Henry found himself powerless in the face of the overpowering forces arrayed against him. If you're interested in the likes of Frederick the Great and the 7 Years' War, then you won't want to miss out on Supremacy 19 for free. This offer is only available
check them out
for
if you're
30
interested.
days. Click the link in the description and forge your empire. Finally, in the dark of night on October 15th, Prince Henry ordered his army to retreat northwestward in 2 columns, towards General Hulsen and his reserves stationed at Kleinvoitsberg. This retreat was a strategic necessity, for the forces arrayed against him were simply too great to resist. Even as Prince Henry retreated, news arrived that Frederick was sending a reinforcement of 20 battalions and 55 squadrons from Silesia. With this knowledge, Prince Henry resolved to maintain communication with Hulsen and remained in his camp until October 22nd, gathering his strength and preparing for the next stage of the battle. As the days passed, Prince Henry remained at his camp to Freiberg's north, as he edged closer to General Hulsen's positions. But even as he prepared for battle, he received a crucial piece of intelligence. The army was expecting reinforcements of their own. It could very well be Hadik's main army, encamped near Dresden. Fearing that his window of opportunity was closing, Prince Henry made the bold decision to attack the isolated 30,000-strong Austrian army and Reichsarmee contingent before these additional troops arrived. Prince Henry, commanding a force of approximately 28,000 men, was facing an opposing force of 30,000 under the leadership of the Prince of Stolberg. Despite the disadvantage in numbers, he spent a week meticulously preparing for the impending battle. As the evening of October 28th descended, he gathered his subordinate officers to explain his plan of attack.
Wow.
The Prussian reconnaissances had revealed that the Austro-Imperial left was vulnerable, lacking any solid position to anchor their defences. Sensing an opportunity, Prince Henry decided to launch a daring assault on the extreme left of the enemy army at Brand and Berthelsdorf. At the same time, another part of his army would engage the Austro-Imperial forces head-on, fixing them in place and preventing them from reinforcing their left flank. The left wing of the Austro-Imperial army was formed by the corps of General Beck, with its front facing the villages of Brand and Berthelsdorf. This wing was protected by several redoubts and batteries. In the centre, the Austro-Imperial army was positioned with entrenchments and batteries covering the roads and the plain below. The reserve was placed behind the centre, ready to intervene wherever needed. The whole position was further strengthened by a network of trenches, abattis, and other field fortifications. Meanwhile, news had reached General Hulsen of Henry's plan. He marshalled his formidable force of 10,500 men and advanced towards their positions, crossing the Mulde River and intending to attack the Austrians and Reichsarmee in their rear. The critical gap between Hadik's army far to the east and the Imperialists of Stolberg was bridged by General Butler. Butler was a seasoned commander of 8,000 soldiers, including an elite corps of 24 squadrons of Allied cavalry and 34 pieces of artillery. They set up camp around Dittmannsdorf on the other side of the Mulde River. As for Stolberg, his main imperial army maintained their steadfast position northeast of Freiberg, extending all the way down into the city. There can be little doubt that Stolberg felt an overwhelming sense of caution, realizing that the positions held by his men could likely only withstand a frontal assault. The Prussians divided their forces into 4 separate bodies. The renowned Seydlitz led the largest column, numbering over 9,000 soldiers. He was charged with sweeping around the Spittelwald to strike at Stolberg, who was holed up in the heart of Freiberg. This daring maneuver would see Seydlitz launch a direct assault against the enemy's left flank. A battalion under General Kleist supported him. Meanwhile, General Otto Stutterheim led the second column of 3,600 men through the thick forest, while his brother, General Johann Stutterheim, commanded the third column of approximately 4,400 troops and launched a diversionary attack against the eastern end of the enemy's works, aiming to create confusion and disarray in the enemy ranks. The reserves, consisting of the 4K'd infantry, remained behind Schirmer. Otto Stutterheim's...
As I said, I'm no military strategist or expert, but I believe hopefully the Prussians don't have too many casualties trying to fix the Austrians in place, while Seydlitz and Kleist trying to outflank the Austrians on their left and rear. Because this looks like very high ground from here with these redoubts and batteries. So, and I suppose they gotta hope that Hadik's forces don't arrive to reinforce Stolberg. And yeah, there's not much I can add to this really, so...
Men were the first to engage in combat. They charged forward, relentlessly pushing against the enemy vanguard in a crowded space in front of Klein-Woltersdorf.
Wow.
The Prussian artillery was quickly set up and positioned once this patch of ground was seized from the enemy, allowing for a devastating barrage to be launched against the opposition. Meanwhile, Johann Stutterheim's column marched forward to strike at the Spittelwald and the imperialist positions in and around Freiberg. However, upon reaching the woods, Johann Stutterheim's troops were met with unexpected resistance from a fierce enemy contingent led by Lieutenant General Anton Friedrich Roth, including the formidable Baden-Baden infantry. Despite the initial resistance, the Prussians persisted in their attack. Stutterheim called for reinforcements and his men continued to fight against the enemy, relentlessly pushing them back from their fortified positions. The enemy sought refuge behind the lines of Abatis, but the Prussian advance was unrelenting. The situation became even more dire when other units, along with Prince Stolberg himself, arrived to reinforce the ranks. Sword in hand, Prince Stolberg valiantly fought against the Prussian onslaught, determined to prevent them from making any further gains. After a grueling and hard-fought battle, the Prussian advance was finally halted, and they were...
I was about to say, I didn't expect Stolberg to leave Freiberg with his garrison. He's probably still got a few handful of troops in Freiberg, but I wasn't expecting him to leave Freiberg and attack the Prussians coming down this way. Because I thought, as I said, I'm no military strategist expert, but I'm sure he would have stayed behind Freiberg's walls and probably repelled the Prussians if they dare attack Freiberg's walls. But then I suppose he felt the need to come to the aid of his troops that are being threatened by this frontal assault by Johann Stutterheim near Losnitz.
Ultimately forced to withdraw from their forward position. The Prussian strategy was a calculated and complex one, with the attacks of the Stutterheim brothers all serving as mere diversions to keep the enemy occupied. Meanwhile, the main attack force under Seydlitz and Kleist, accompanied by Prince Henry himself, was stealthily proceeding with its mission. Seydlitz's column moved in a wide arc to engage the enemy in the area directly opposite to where they arrived. Seydlitz's men marched towards Klein-Schirmer. However, they soon encountered a formidable wall of imperialist resistance, threatening to halt their advance before it had even begun. It was then that General Kleist, leading a small force, launched a ferocious attack against the soldiers stationed at Klein-Schirmer. With swords clashing and battle cries echoing throughout the valley, Kleist's men pushed the enemy back and cleared the way for Seydlitz to proceed. From a vantage point of the woods, Major Seeger caught sight of the Prussian main attack force moving towards the hamlets of St. Michael's and Linden. Without a moment's hesitation, Seeger rallied the troops he could gather and took up position at the edge of the wood, ready to face the approaching...
Oh, I just saw that Stolberg has gone back behind Freiberg's walls. But now, I am definitely interested to see how the Prussians deal with these units and reserves coming up. to their left.
Enemy. As Seydlitz's forces moved forward, they came upon a vast expanse of open country near Brand, where they faced off against General Meyer's imposing army. The Prussians refused to be intimidated and devised a daring plan to outmaneuver their opponents. They sent a small yet intrepid detachment to contain Meyer's forces, while the rest of the main attack force bypassed them and launched a full-scale assault on the enemy's stronghold. As the Prussian column marched forward, they were met with fierce resistance from Sieger and his men. The clash was intense, with imperialist cavalry charging headlong into the Prussian cavalry escort. Despite being vastly outnumbered, Sieger and his compatriots held their ground, determined to halt the enemy advance. For a brief moment, it seemed as though Sieger might succeed in derailing the entire Prussian plan of action. The tide of battle was turning as Major General Vetti appeared with 2 hussar units, the 34th Hussars of Dessewiffi and those of Baranier. Without delay, they charged forward in a counterattack, aimed at pushing back the Prussian forces surging forth from the confines of the Spittelwald. The Prussians, taken aback by this sudden onslaught, were forced to halt their advance. In a matter of moments, they were driven off the Galgenberg by the ferocity of Vetti's men. It seemed as though Prince Henry was about to suffer a crushing defeat, but the fighting soon stabilized, at least for the moment, in that area. In the meantime, to the south, the battle around St. Michaelis and Brand had swung in favor of the Prussians in a resolute manner. Kleist and Seydlitz had spearheaded the assault, surging right towards the town of Freiberg. Stolberg could have defended Freiberg with a tenacious resistance by obliterating part of the town, which would have made it extremely difficult for the Prussians to penetrate. However, instead of taking that uncompromising stance, he executed a fighting withdrawal from Freiberg. Stolberg's quick thinking spared the town from suffering any significant damage during the battle. Meanwhile, the Stutterheim brothers continued to make significant strides in the battle. By 10:30 a.m., their forces had renewed their advance and pushed the remaining enemy troops out of Klein-Waltersdorf. The 7th Infantry of Bevan, under Otto's command, charged ahead with great ferocity, forcing the enemy to retreat from their mountain stronghold. The Prussians managed to capture 5 cannon and a flag, surrounding the enemy from the south in the process. Schmettau's 4th Cavalry was equally relentless, charging through 2 regiments at the Spittelwald, capturing 10 guns and 8 flags with impressive might. At around the same time, Johann Stutterheim charged forward with his task force towards Freiberg, adding more momentum to the already favourable situation for the Prussians. By 11 o'clock in the morning, the tide of the battle had irrefutably turned to the advantage of the Prussian forces. Even the 33rd Infantry of Esterhazy, sent by Butler to support Stolberg, could not stem the onslaught of the Prussian forces closing in from the west and the south. With the enemy forces rapidly approaching and the outlook increasingly bleak, Stolberg began contemplating retreat towards Frauenstein. Shortly before 1 p.m., he initiated his retreat, which was aided by the cannons, to inflict as much damage as possible on the enemy, while providing cover for the imperialist forces as they withdrew. Though the Prussian commanders did not pursue, the retreat was a critical moment in the Battle of Freiberg. The situation around Freiberg was dire, with no support troops to come to the Austrians' aid. The Prussian forces advanced. Meanwhile, General Hulsen led his forces to the Mulde, trying to reach the rear of Stolberg's forces. However, the retreat was well underway, and Butler's troops were stationed nearby at Dittmannsdorf, preventing Hulsen from safely launching an assault. The price of victory was high, with the Prussian forces sustaining approximately 1,400 casualties in the bloody engagement, while their Austrian adversaries suffered far greater losses, with roughly 2,700 killed or wounded. and a staggering 4,390 men and 79 officers captured, along with 28 guns and 11 battle flags. As the battered and defeated Allied forces retreated slowly upon Diepoldiswalde, the grim realization of their impending defeat began to dawn upon them. The forces of General Hulsen had missed the battle entirely.
Wow. Yesterday I was 60. Today I'm 18 again. Okay.
The resounding victory at Freiberg, located southwest of Dresden, proved to be the final blow to the already fragile Austrian position. The final movements on this front were quick and decisive. By the time Weid's forces arrived in Saxony, the Battle of Freiberg had already been won by the Prussians. Even the most stubborn hawks in Vienna had to concede that defeat was inevitable. The brunt of the fighting had fallen on Saxony, which had been all but destroyed. It was fitting, therefore, that a Saxon, Karl Thomas von Fritsch, was chosen to deliver the message to Frederick that Austria was prepared to negotiate. On the 25th of November, at the town of Meissen, the two sides finally came together to discuss the terms of peace. The grand negotiations commenced on the 30th of December 1762, within the esteemed halls of the Saxon Palace of Hubertusburg, just a short distance from Leipzig. The Austrians found themselves in a position of weakness, with their negotiating power severely hampered. Prior to receiving the news of the Prussian triumph at Freiberg, Daun had already forewarned Maria Theresa of the dire predicament they faced, stating, "If there is no hope of peace, then I cannot see how your Majesty can continue the war, as the current situation is such that it is to be feared that the army cannot be kept in one piece throughout the winter." The absence of crucial supplies meant that the soldiers were scattered far and wide. The once mighty officer corps was now reduced to a state of total demoralization. In 1760, Kaunitz had warned against a peace that left all of Silesia in Prussian hands, and yet despite his fervent hopes, that was exactly what he received. Not even the fortress of Glatz, which had been held by Austria since July of 1760, could be maintained, but the delay in signing the treaty on the 15th of February 1763 was not due to Austrian stubbornness, but rather to Frederick's shrewd tactics. He cunningly prolonged the negotiations in order to extract every last ounce of Saxon resources, be it men, money, or supplies, and even women were not spared, as large numbers were carried off to Prussia in order to aid in the repopulation of the war-torn regions. The Peace of Hubertusburg consisted of 21 articles, but one in particular stood out as the most significant. Article 12 confirmed the treaties of Breslau, Berlin and Dresden from 1742 and 1745, which marked the conclusion of the first two Silesian wars. Essentially, peace had been achieved by returning to the way things were before the war. While it may have seemed like 6.5 years of fighting had been for nothing, the more insightful among the contemporaries understood the importance of the outcome. Among them was Count Johann Hartwig Ernst von Bernstorff, the Danish chief minister, who had kept his country out of the war, stating all Frederick had to do was not to lose in order to win everything. Had Count Johann Hartwig Ernst von Bernstorff's analysis reached Frederick's ears, he may have found himself nodding in agreement. He understood the immense stakes of the conflict and how perilously close his gambit had come to total failure. His mind was not set on aggression. He confided in Prince Henry that his next course of action would be to pay off his state's debts, and after that, I shall be able to die if I feel like it.
Wow.
Though Frederick believed that Maria Theresa and Kaunitz had grown weary of war and desired amicable relations, he remained ever vigilant, never forgetting the fable of the cat and the mice. Truly, The 7 Years' War had been a struggle of existential proportions, centered upon the quest for great power status. As Leopold von Ranke, the renowned German historian and progenitor of modern source-based history, said, "If one were to define a great power as one that can maintain itself against all comers, even when they are united, then Frederick had elevated Prussia to that lofty position. For the first time since the era of the Saxon emperors and Henry the Lion, a self-sufficient power emerged in northern Germany, requiring no alliance, relying solely on its own strength."
Frederick the Great ruled Prussia until his death, 1786. Victories and cultural achievements. In the 19th century, Prussia under Chancellor Otto von Bismarck was the driving force behind the unification of Germany. That little bit I knew. Prussia was officially abolished by Control Council Law No. 46 and passed by the Allied occupation authorities in 1947.
Thank you very much for watching this video. Please leave a like, it really helps out the channel. If there is a topic, a person you would like to know more about, let me know your thoughts in a comment. I would also like to thank all my patrons and channel members for...
And that'll do it. This has been another interesting video by, by House of History and...
From a vantage...
Sorry. And by the looks of it, that's the last episode in this series about Frederick the Great and Prussian history. So, hopefully you enjoyed this episode and the last episode, by the looks of it, the last episode in this series. And if you enjoyed this reaction, please like, comment and subscribe, and I'll see you next.